The transport ship landed with a heavy thud that shook Casey Morgan's bones. She stood in line with 40 other humans, all of them wearing the gray jumpsuits of conscripts. None of them spoke. They had learned during the 3-week journey that speaking brought punishment. The doors opened and cold air rushed in. Casey stepped forward with the others, her eyes adjusting to the harsh white lights of the Volcaron military station. It hung in orbit above a planet she did not recognize, a world of brown and red that the Valkyrans had conquered long before they came to Earth. 6 months ago, Casey had been living a quiet life in Montana. She worked at a wildlife sanctuary, training rescued predators for release back into the wild. Bears, wolves, mountain lions, she had worked with them all. She understood how they thought, how they moved, how they communicated. It was a gift she had developed over 7 years. Then the Valkyrans came. Their ships darkened the skies over every major city. Within 2 weeks, Earth's government surrendered. Within 2 months, the conscription began. The Valkyran Empire needed soldiers for their endless wars, and they took them from every species they conquered. "Move faster, prey creatures!" a voice shouted. Casey looked up and saw her first Valkyran officer up close. He stood nearly 8 feet tall, his skin covered in dark scales that looked like armor. His eyes were yellow with vertical slits, and his mouth was filled with sharp teeth. He wore a black uniform, decorated with medals and symbols she did not understand. This was Commander Draxvol. Casey would learn his name soon enough, and she would learn to fear it. The humans were marched through long corridors filled with other species. Casey saw tall, thin creatures with blue skin. She saw small, furry beings that walked on 4 legs. She saw things she had no words for. All of them wore the same gray jumpsuits. All of them kept their eyes down. They reached a large room where Valkyran officers sorted the conscripts into groups. Casey was pushed toward a line of humans who looked weak and scared. An officer grabbed her arm and examined her. "Small," he said in a cold voice. "Thin, no muscle. What use are you?" Casey said nothing. She had learned that lesson too. The officer made a mark on his tablet and pushed her forward. "Labor pool. You will clean and carry. Try not to die too quickly." She was assigned to a barracks with 20 other humans. The room was cold and the beds were hard, but Casey did not complain. She watched and listened instead. That was what she had always done with predators. You watched them first. You learned their patterns. You found their weaknesses. On her second day, Casey met Kira Voss. Kira was a few years younger than Casey, with short dark hair and nervous eyes. She had been on the station for 3 months already. "Keep your head down," Kira whispered as they cleaned one of the station's many corridors. "Don't look the Valkyrans in the eye. Don't speak unless spoken to. And stay away from the beast pens." "Beast pens?" Casey asked. Kira's face went pale. "The Vernax. They keep them in the lower levels. Massive creatures, 6 legs, all teeth and claws. The Valkyrans use them for executions." She shuddered. "I saw it once. They threw a conscript who tried to escape into the pit. It was over in seconds." Casey nodded and said nothing more. But that night, when the lights went dim and the guards changed shifts, she left her barracks. She moved through the corridors with the quiet confidence of someone who'd spent years walking among predators. She found the lower levels. She found the beast pens. The Vernax were everything Kira had described and more. They were the size of earth elephants, but built like wolves. 6 powerful legs. Long bodies covered in thick gray hide. Heads filled with teeth that could crush bone. Their eyes glowed faintly in the dark. Casey stood at the edge of their enclosure and watched. She counted 5 of them. 4 were young, maybe adolescents by their size. The 5th was larger and older, a female with scars across her face and shoulders. The Valkyrans had put a metal collar around her neck with a name etched into it. Deathfang. Casey watched how they moved. She watched how they interacted with each other. She saw the way Deathfang kept the others in line with small sounds and subtle body movements. She recognized the patterns. These were pack animals. They had a hierarchy. They had communication. They were not monsters. They were predators. And Casey understood predators. She came back the next night and the night after that. She began making soft sounds, low tones that would not alarm them. She sat outside their enclosure and let them get used to her presence. She brought scraps of food she had saved from her own meals and placed them near the bars. Deathfang noticed her first. The old female would watch Casey with those glowing eyes, head tilted slightly, curious. She did not growl. She did not threaten. She simply observed. Casey smiled. It was the first time she had smiled since Earth fell. Her routine continued for 2 weeks. Clean corridors during the day. Visit the Vernax at night. Watch, listen, learn. The creatures began to recognize her scent. They no longer tensed when she approached. Deathfang would sometimes walk to the edge of the enclosure and press her nose against the bars when Casey arrived, but Casey made a mistake. She stayed too long one night, and she was not alone when she left. Commander Draxville stood in the corridor, his yellow eyes burning with contempt. Behind him stood Lieutenant UnaHFY, a smaller reptilian officer who was known for his cruelty. "What is this?" Draxville demanded. "A human near my Vernax?" Casey kept her eyes down. "I was lost, Commander. I apologize." Draxville stepped closer. He grabbed her chin and forced her to look up at him. "Lost? You are far from your barracks, little prey creature. Perhaps you were looking for a quick death." "No, Commander." He released her with a shove that sent her stumbling backward. "Humans," he spat. "Chicken species. You are fit for nothing but feeding to real predators." He looked at the beast pens and then back at her. "Perhaps that is what I should do with you. Throw you to Deathfang and watch her tear you apart." Lieutenant UnaHFY laughed, a harsh sound like metal scraping metal. Draxville turned away. "Get back to your barracks. If I find you here again, I will not give you a second warning." Casey walked away, her heart pounding. But her mind was calm. She had seen something in that moment, something the Valkyrans did not understand. Deathfang had watched the entire confrontation. And when Draxville threatened Casey, the great beast had shifted her weight, lowered her head, and rumbled deep in her throat. Not at Casey, at him. The bond was forming. Casey just needed more time. She hoped she would get it. 3 more weeks passed on the station. Casey continued her work during the day, scrubbing floors and carrying supplies like the other human conscripts. She kept her head down. She spoke only when necessary. She became invisible, but every night she returned to the beast pens. The Vernax had accepted her now. She could walk along the edge of their enclosure without triggering any alarm from them. She had learned their sounds, the low rumble of contentment, the sharp bark of warning, the soft whine they made when they were hungry. She'd had begun making those sounds herself, and the creatures responded. Deathfang was her greatest success. The old female had become almost gentle with Casey. She would press her massive head against the bars, and Casey would scratch the rough hide behind her ears. She would make a sound, a specific low tone she had developed, and Deathfang would sit back on her haunches like an obedient dog. Casey had trained bears to do the same thing back on Earth. The principle was the same: patience, consistency, respect. You did not dominate a predator through fear. You earned its trust through understanding. Thought she had even started working with the younger Vernax. They were more playful and less patient than Deathfang, but they followed the old female's lead. If Deathfang accepted Casey, they would too. Casey knew she was taking a terrible risk. If the Valkyrans caught her again, Commander Draxful would carry out his threat. But she could not stop. The Vernaks were the only thing on this station that made sense to her. They were predators, yes, but they were honest in a way the Valkyrans were not. They did not torture for pleasure. They did not humiliate for sport. They were simply what nature had made them. On the night, everything changed. Casey was sitting outside the enclosure, humming softly to the creatures. Deathfang was lying down, her great head resting near the bars. The younger ones were sleeping in a pile nearby. Casey did not hear Lieutenant Yenek's approach until it was too late. "I knew it," the reptilian officer said, his voice filled with cruel satisfaction. "I knew you were sneaking around down here." Casey stood quickly. "Lieutenant, I can explain. Save your words, human." Yenek stepped closer, his tail swishing behind him. "I have been watching you for days. You think you are clever, but you are just a stupid prey animal." He grabbed her arm and twisted it painfully. Casey bit back a cry of pain. "Commander Draxful will be very interested to hear about this," Yenik said. "But first, I think I will make things more interesting." He pulled a small device from his belt and pressed a button. A few moments later, 2 Valkyrum guards arrived. They were carrying a crate marked with supply codes. "Open it," Yenix ordered. The guards opened the crate. Inside were components for the station's weapon systems. Valuable components that were supposed to be locked in a secure storage room. "Put our hands on them," Yenix commanded. Before Casey could react, the guards forced her hands onto the components. Her fingerprints were now all over the stolen goods. Yenix smiled, showing all his sharp teeth. "Sabotage and theft. The penalty is death." Casey's blood went cold. "I did not steal anything. You are framing me. Who will believe you?" Yenix laughed. "You are nothing. You are prey. And tomorrow, you will be food." The guards dragged Casey to a holding cell and threw her inside. The door slammed shut with a sound that echoed in her bones. She sat in the darkness for hours, her mind racing. She thought about Deathfang. She thought about the bond they had built. She thought about all the things she had learned in those quiet nights by the beast pens. And slowly, a plan began to form. The next morning, Casey was dragged before the entire station population. Hundreds of beings filled the main assembly hall, Valkyrans in their black uniforms, conscripts in their gray jumpsuits. Officers and laborers and prisoners all gathered to watch. Commander Draxful stood on a raised platform, his yellow eyes gleaming with satisfaction. Lieutenant Yenix stood beside him, barely hiding his smile. "This human," Draxful announced, his voice booming through the hall, "has committed crimes against the Valkyran Empire. She has stolen military equipment. She has sabotaged our weapon systems. The evidence is clear." Casey stood in the center of the hall, her hands bound behind her back. She looked out at the crowd and saw Kira's face among the human conscripts. Kira was crying. "The penalty for these crimes is death," Draxful continued. "And I have chosen a fitting method for this chicken species. She will be thrown into the Vonax pit." A murmur ran through the crowd. Even some of the Valkyrans looked surprised. The pit was reserved for the worst criminals, the ones who needed to be made into examples. "No one has ever survived the pit," Draxful said, his voice dripping with pleasure. "The Vernaks are hungry. They have not been fed in 3 days. This human will provide them with a meal and provide us with entertainment." The conscripts in the crowd were silent. Some looked away. Others watched with horror in their eyes. Kira pushed forward from the crowd. "She is innocent," she shouted. "This is murder." A Valkyran guard struck Kira across the face and knocked her to the ground. 2 more guards dragged her away as she screamed. Casey watched her friend disappear into the crowd. She wanted to call out, to tell Kira it would be okay. But she could not lie. She did not know if it would be okay. Drax, single quotes VUL raised his hand, and the crowd fell silent. Before we begin, does the prisoner have any last words? Casey looked up at him. Her heart was pounding, but her voice was steady. I am not afraid. Draxville laughed. Of course you are afraid. All prey is afraid. I am not prey, Casey said quietly, but no one heard her. The guards stripped off her gray jumpsuit and dressed her in a thin white robe, the traditional clothing of the condemned. They marched her through the corridors toward the lower levels, toward the beast pens, toward the pit. Behind her, she could hear the crowd following. They were chanting now, a phrase that made her stomach turn. Die now, chicken! Die now, chicken! Die now, chicken! The pit entrance loomed before her. It was a massive door made of thick metal, covered in scratches and dents from the creatures on the other side. The guards pushed her forward until she stood at the threshold. Draxville appeared beside her, leaning down to speak in her ear. I want you to know, he said softly, that I am going to enjoy watching this. Every scream, every drop of blood. I will remember it for years. Casey turned her head and looked him in the eye. So will I. Before he could respond, the guard shoved her through the door. She stumbled into darkness. The door slammed shut behind her. She was alone in the Vunax pit, and somewhere in the shadows, she heard them moving. The pit was larger than Casey had expected. It stretched out before her in a rough circle, maybe 50 meters across. The floor was covered in dirt and sand, and scattered across it were bones. Hundreds of bones. The remains of everyone who had been thrown in here before her. Above, viewing galleries circled the pit on all sides. Casey could see hundreds of faces looking down at her. Valkyrans with their yellow eyes gleaming, conscripts with their faces pale with fear. She could hear them still chanting, though the sound was muffled now by the thick walls. Die now, chicken! Die now, chicken! Casey took a deep breath and walked to the center of the pit. She stood there, alone, and waited. A loud horn sounded. Across the pit, 5 metal doors began to open. Casey heard the creatures before she saw them, the scrape of claws on stone, the deep rumble of their breathing, the click of teeth snapping in anticipation. The Vunax emerged from their cages. They were even more terrifying in the open space than they had been behind bars. Their 6 legs moved with terrible grace as they spread out around the edges of the pit. Their eyes glowed in the dim light, fixed on Casey like she was already meat. The crowd above roared with excitement. Casey recognized each of the 5 creatures. The 4 younger ones circled to her left and right, moving in the hunting pattern she had watched them practice in their enclosure. And in front of her, emerging last from the largest cage, was Deathfang. The old female was magnificent and terrifying. Her scarred hide caught the light as she moved. Her massive head swung from side to side, taking in the scene. Her eyes found Casey, and something changed in them. Casey did not move. She stood perfectly still in the center of the pit, her arms at her sides, her breathing slow and controlled. She had done this 1,000 times before, not with Vunax, but with creatures just as deadly. You did not run from a predator. Running triggered the chase instinct. You stood your ground. You showed them you were not prey. The younger Vunax were growing restless. They snarled and snapped at the air, working themselves up for the attack. One of them, the smallest, began to move toward Casey with its head low and its muscles tense. Casey made a sound. It was the low tone she had developed over weeks of patient work in the beast pens. A specific sound that meant safety, that meant food, that meant trust. She had used it every night when she visited them. She had used it when she fed them scraps from her own meals. She had used it when she scratched behind Deathfang's ears. The small Vunax stopped. Its head tilted to the side in confusion. Casey made the sound again, louder this time. She added a second tone, a call for attention. The crowd above had gone quiet. They did not understand what was happening. Deathfang stepped forward. Her massive body blocked the view of the other Vernax as she approached Casey. She was close now. Close enough that Casey could smell the creature's breath, could see every scar on her ancient hide. The crowd held its breath. This was the moment. This was the kill. Deathfang lowered her head. Her glowing eyes looked into Casey's face. Casey could feel the heat radiating from the creature's body, could hear the deep rumble building in her chest. Casey raised her hand very slowly, very gently. She placed her palm against Deathfang's snout. The great beast closed her eyes and pressed into the touch. A gasp went through the crowd. Then silence. Complete, absolute silence. Casey began to speak. Not loudly, just in her normal voice, the voice she had used every night in the beast pens. Good girl. That's a good girl. I am here now. We are together. Deathfang made a sound, not a growl, but a rumble of contentment. The same sound she made when Casey scratched behind her ears. The other Vernax had stopped their circling. They watched Deathfang, waiting for her lead. When the old female did not attack, they did not attack. That was how pack animals worked. They followed the leader. Casey gave a soft whistle, a command she had taught them over weeks of patient training. Sit, wait, stay. One by one, the Vornax sat back on their haunches. Their tails curled around their legs. Their heads turned toward Casey, waiting for the next command. The silence in the galleries was broken by a single voice. Commander Draxful, what is this? He shouted. What is happening? Casey looked up at him. He was standing in the command gallery, his yellow eyes wide with something she had never seen in him before. Fear. You do not understand, do you? Casey called up to him. Her voice echoed in the pit. You never did. You look at humans and you see prey. You see weak creatures meant for labor and death. But you are wrong. She turned in a slow circle, addressing the entire crowd now. The Vernax remained seated around her, calm and obedient. On my world, we have spent thousands of years living alongside predators. We did not hide from them. We did not just fight them. We learned to understand them. We learned to communicate with them. We made them our partners. She placed her hand on Deathfang's head. The great beast rumbled with pleasure. You called me chicken, Casey continued. You said I was fit only for feeding to real predators. But you forgot something important. Chickens are prey. Humans are not. Humans are the species that taught wolves to guard our children. We are the species that rode horses into battle. We are the species that walked into the wilderness with nothing but patience and came back with the deadliest creatures on our planet following at our heels. She looked directly at Draxful. You did not throw me to the beasts. You threw me to my friends. For a long moment, no one moved. The crowd stared down at the impossible scene. A small human woman standing unharmed in a pit of monsters, surrounded by creatures that obeyed her commands. Then Draxful found his voice. Kill her. He screamed at his guards. Shoot her. Shoot the beasts. Kill them all. Guards raised their weapons and aimed down into the pit. Casey gave a sharp whistle, a new command. One she had never used before, but had always planned for. Scatter. Survive. The Varnax exploded into motion. They were impossibly fast, their 6 legs carrying them across the pit in seconds. The guards fired, but the creatures were already gone, disappearing into the shadows, climbing the walls with claws that dug into stone like it was soft clay. Deathfang grabbed Casey's robe in her teeth and pulled her onto her back. Casey gripped the creature's thick hide as Deathfang leaped toward the wall of the pit. Behind them, chaos erupted. The crowd was screaming now, But it was not the chant of death anymore. It was the sound of fear. Deathfang's claws tore into the stone wall as she climbed. Casey held on tight, her fingers gripping the thick hide, her body pressed flat against the creature's back. Below them, energy blasts scorched the air where they had been standing moments before. They reached the viewing gallery in seconds. Deathfang pulled herself over the railing and landed among the crowd. Spectators screamed and scrambled to get away. Some of them fell. Some of them were trampled by their own kind. The other 4 Vornax had scattered through the pit and were now climbing different sections of the wall. They emerged into the galleries at different points, creating chaos in multiple directions at once. The guards could not focus their fire. They were too busy trying not to die. Casey slid off Deathfang's back and landed on her feet. She looked around quickly, taking in the scene. The viewing gallery was in complete panic. Valkyrans were running for the exits. Conscripts were pressing against the walls, too scared to move. She saw Kira among them, her face bruised from the guard's blow, but her eyes wide with hope. "Casey," Kira shouted. "You are alive. Stay here." Casey called back. "Stay with the other humans. Do not run." She turned to Deathfang and made a series of quick sounds commands she had practiced in the quiet nights by the beast pens. The great beast listened, her head tilted, her glowing eyes focused on Casey's face. Then Deathfang moved. She bounded through the gallery, not attacking the fleeing crowd, but blocking the main exits. Her massive body filled the doorways, her teeth bared in warning. Anyone who tried to push past her was met with a growl that shook their bones. The other Vernax followed her lead. They positioned themselves at key points around the galleries, cutting off escape routes, herding the panicked crowd back toward the center. They did not kill unless someone attacked them first. They were following Casey's training. Control. Contain. Do not harm. Unless necessary. Casey moved through the chaos toward the command gallery. She knew where Draxful would be, the highest point, the best view, the place where he could watch his entertainment without getting his claws dirty. She pushed past screaming Valkyrans and frozen conscripts, her bare feet slapping against the metal floor. She found the stairs to the command level. A guard stepped into her path, raising his weapon. Before he could fire, a gray blur knocked him aside. One of the younger Vernax had followed her, keeping pace, protecting her back. Casey climbed the stairs. Her heart was pounding, but her mind was clear. She had faced predators before. She knew how to be calm when everything around her was chaos. The command gallery was smaller than the viewing areas below. It had comfortable seats, screens showing camera feeds from around the pit, and a large window looking down on the arena. Lieutenant Yenix was there, backed against the wall, his reptilian eyes wide with terror, and Commander Draxful was standing at the window, watching the chaos below with something like disbelief on his face. He turned when Casey entered. For a moment, they just looked at each other, the massive Valkyran commander and the small human woman in her torn white robe. "You," Draxful said. His voice was quiet now, all the arrogance gone. "How did you do this?" Casey walked toward him, the young Vernax at her side. "I told you. Humans understand predators. We have lived with them for thousands of years. We know how they think, how they feel, how they communicate. They are beasts," Draxful said. "They cannot be controlled." "They are not controlled," Casey replied. "They are my partners." "There's a difference." Draxful's hand moved toward the weapon at his belt. Fast, faster than Casey expected, he drew it and aimed at her chest. "Then let us see if your partners can save you from this." He fired. Casey did not have time to move, but Deathfang did. The old female burst through the window in a shower of broken glass. She had climbed the outside of the command tower, following Casey's scent, protecting her as she had been trained to protect her pack. Her massive body intercepted the energy blast and absorbed it into her thick hide. She roared, not from pain, but from rage. Deathfang crashed into Draxful and pinned him to the floor. Her claws dug into the metal on either side of his head. Her teeth were inches from his face. Saliva dripped onto his scales as she growled, a sound that seemed to shake the entire room. Lieutenant Yenix tried to run. The young Vernax caught him before he reached the door, knocking him down and standing over him with teeth bared. Casey walked to where Draxvol lay pinned beneath Deathfang's weight. She looked down at him without hatred, without anger, just calm certainty. "You made a mistake," she said. "Your empire made a mistake. You looked at humans and saw weakness. You saw small bodies and soft skin and no claws or fangs. You thought we were prey." She crouched down beside him, bringing her face close to his. But prey does not survive on a planet full of predators. Prey does not cross oceans and climb mountains and spread to every corner of a world that wants to kill them. Prey does not tame wolves and ride horses and train eagles to hunt for them. She paused. "We are not prey. We are the greatest pack bonders the galaxy has ever seen." Casey stood and walked to the command console. She pressed buttons until she found what she was looking for, the station's broadcast system. Her voice would reach every corner of the station, every barracks, every cell, every corridor. "Attention," she said, her voice calm and clear. "My name is Casey Morgan. I am a human. As you can see from the cameras in the pit arena, the Vernax are no longer under Valkyran control. They follow my commands now." She paused, letting the words sink in. "I am not here to destroy this station or to kill everyone on it. I am here because I was falsely accused, sentenced to death, and thrown to the beast by officers who thought it would be entertaining to watch me die. That will not happen again." She looked at Draxful, still pinned under Deathfang's claws. "To the conscripts of this station, the humans and everyone else who was taken from their homes and forced to serve, you have a choice now. You can remain in your cells and wait for whatever comes next. Or you can stand up." She took a breath. "The Valkyrans called me chicken. They said I was fit only for feeding to real predators. But they forgot what humans do with predators. We do not fear them. We do not run from them. We make them our family." Through the window, she could see movement in the galleries below. The conscripts were rising. The gray jumpsuits were pushing back against the black uniforms. It was not a violent uprising, not yet. But it was a shift, a change in the balance of power. "Commander Draxful," Casey said, turning back to the fallen officer. "You have a choice. You can face trial for your crimes against the conscripts of this station. Or you can try your luck with Deathfang." Deathfang growled, right on cue. "What is your choice?" Draxvol looked up at the beast above him. He looked at Casey, and for the first time, he saw her clearly, not as prey, not as a chicken, but as something far more dangerous, a human who had made friends with monsters. "Trial," he whispered. "I choose trial." Casey nodded. "Good choice." The station fell to the conscripts within 6 hours. There was very little violence. Most of the Valkyran officers surrendered when they saw the Vernax walking calmly beside the humans. Those who tried to fight were quickly overwhelmed. Those who tried to flee found every exit blocked. Lieutenant Yenix did not choose trial. He chose to run. They found what was left of him in a maintenance corridor. One of the younger Vernax had caught him trying to sneak into an escape pod. Casey had given no command for the kill, but she had not forbidden it either. Some choices, she decided, were not hers to make. Commander Draxvol was placed in a holding cell to await judgment. He did not speak. He did not protest. He simply sat in the corner and stared at the wall, his yellow eyes empty. The mighty Valkyran commander, brought low by a creature he had called chicken. Casey did not celebrate. There was too much work to do done, The conscripts looked to her for leadership, and she accepted the role even though it frightened her. She organized teams to secure the station. She made sure the wounded were treated, the hungry were fed, the scared were comforted. She spoke to every species on the station: humans, the blue-skinned tall ones, the small furry creatures that walked on 4 legs, all of them. She told them the same thing. We are not going to become what they were. We are going to be better. The Varnax stayed close to her. Deathfang rarely left her side, and the 4 younger ones followed wherever she went. The conscripts learned to move around them, to speak softly in their presence, to show them respect. They were not pets. They were partners. On the 3rd day, a communication came through from a nearby Valkyran military outpost. They had heard about what happened. They wanted to know who was in charge. Casey answered the call herself, with Deathfang sitting beside her like a massive, terrifying guard dog. "My name is Casey Morgan," she said. "I speak for the free beings of this station." The Valkyran officer on the other end stared at her through the screen. "You are human," he said, as if he could not believe it. "Yes. And the reports are true? You have tamed the Vernax?" "I have not tamed them," Casey corrected. "I have befriended them. There is a difference." The officer's scales seemed to pale. "The High Command will not allow this to stand. They will send warships. They will destroy that station and everyone on it." Casey smiled, but there was no warmth in it. Then they had better bring their own Vernax. And they had better hope those Vernax have not already met a human. She ended the call. Kira found her later that night, standing on the station's observation deck. The conquered planet rotated slowly below them, its brown and red surface scarred by Valkyran mining operations. Beyond it, the stars stretched out forever. Deathfang lay curled up nearby, her great head resting on her paws. She looked almost peaceful. "The other humans have been talking," Kira said. "Word is spreading through the station's networks. Other Valkyran facilities. Other conscript groups. They are hearing about what you did." Casey nodded slowly. "Good. Some of them want to know if you can teach them. The beast training, I mean. The way you communicate with the Vernax." Kira paused. "There are Vernax on other stations too. And other creatures like them. The Valkyrans use beasts for war and executions across their whole empire." "I know," Casey said. She had been thinking about this. "Any human can learn what I learned. It is not magic. It is patience. It is understanding. It is treating another creature with respect instead of fear." She turned to face Kyra. "We are going to teach them. All of them. Every human in this empire. We are going to show them how to bond with the creatures the Valkyrans use as weapons." Kira's eyes widened. That would change everything. Yes, it would. A message came through a few days later from a human on another station. A man named Paul, who had worked as a veterinarian before the Valkyran invasion. He had read the reports about Casey and the Vernax. He wanted to know how she had done it. Casey sent him everything she knew. Training techniques, body language guides, sound patterns, feeding schedules. All of it. More messages came after that. A woman named Linda, who had trained rescue dogs. A man named Chris, who had worked with elephants in a zoo. A young woman named Maria, who had grown up on a ranch with horses and cattle. All of them had experience with animals. All of them understood the basic principle. Humans and predators could be partners. The Valkyran High Command sent their response 2 weeks after the station fell. 3 warships dropped out of hyperspace and positioned themselves around the station. They demanded surrender. They threatened destruction. Casey answered them from the command center, with all 5 Varnax arranged behind her like a living wall of teeth and claws. "You can destroy this station," she said calmly. "You can kill every conscript on board. But you cannot kill what we have started. Your empire uses beasts as weapons. You breed them, train them, unleash them on your enemies. But you never understood them. You only feared them. She leaned forward. Humans do not fear predators. We live with them. We bond with them. We make them family. And right now, on stations across your empire, humans are applying that same principle to every creature you have ever used against us. She smiled. You made a mistake when you conscripted our species. You thought you were recruiting prey, but you recruited the greatest animal handlers in the galaxy. And now your own weapons are turning against you. The Volcaran commander on the warship was silent for a long moment. Then he gave an order to his crew, and the 3 warships turned away. They did not fire. They did not attack. They retreated. Casey watched them go. Beside her, Deathfang made a low rumble of satisfaction. Kira appeared at her shoulder. They will be back. With more ships. More soldiers. I know, Casey said. But we will be ready. And we will not be alone. She looked out at the stars, at the vast empire that had conquered her world and enslaved her people. Somewhere out there, other humans were learning what she had learned. They were reaching out to the beasts that were supposed to kill them. They were making friends in the darkness. What happens now? Kira asked. Casey thought about the question. She thought about Earth, about her home, about the life she had lost. She thought about the long road ahead and all the battles still to fight. Now we go home, she said. And we bring our new friends with us. Deathfang rose and pressed her great head against Casey's side. Casey rested her hand on the creature's scarred hide and felt the warmth of her breath. They had called her chicken. They had thrown her to the beasts. They had expected her to die. They had been wrong. Humans did not die when you threw them to predators. Humans made friends, and that was the most terrifying thing in the galaxy.